Lee Marvin was born on February 19, 1924 in New York City. Marvin grew up in a home that had money but wasn't always peaceful. His father, Lamont Waltman Marvin, worked in advertising and had fought in World War I. His mother, Courtney Washington Davidge, came from a well-known Virginia family with strong Southern ties. Even though his family had a good background, Lee's childhood was anything but quiet or well-behaved. He got kicked out of several schools because he had behavior problems and a wild attitude that would later show up in the tough, rebellious characters he played in movies. Marvin's life changed completely when World War II started. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps and fought in the Pacific. He fought bravely in the Battle of Saipan, where he was badly hurt by machine gun fire. That injury left him with scars on his body and also changed the way he saw the world. The scary and crazy experiences of war would later make his acting feel incredibly real, like he had seen life and death up close. Marvin's time in the war created a toughness in him that wasn't fake. It was really who he was. He received the Purple Heart Medal for his service, which showed how brave and selfless he had been. After the war, Marvin wandered around for a while before he discovered acting. He started small, working as a plumber's helper before he decided to try theater in upstate New York. Acting seemed to come easily to him. His deep, powerful voice and strong presence made him stand out right away. He started performing in small theater shows and soon moved on to television and movies in the early 1950s. His early career was full of smaller roles, usually playing bad guys, soldiers, or tough characters. But even in those small parts, Marvin's talent was obvious. Both audiences and directors were attracted to how real he seemed. He didn't pretend to be tough. He really was tough. Marvin's big break came in the late 1950s and early 1960s with movies like The Wild One from 1953, Bad Day at Black Rock from 1955, and The Big Heat from 1953, where his scary intensity made a strong impression. But it was his performance in Cat Ballou from 1965 that made him a Hollywood legend. Playing both the drunk gunslinger Kid Shalene and his evil twin, Marvin showed an unexpected talent for comedy and won the Academy Award for Best Actor. It was a role that perfectly mixed his toughness with self-making fun of himself humor, proving that underneath his serious exterior was a man who wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. Throughout the 1960s and 1970 seconds, Marvin became one of the most important leading men in American movies. He starred in famous films like The Dirty Dozen from 1967, Point Blank from 1967, Hell in the Pacific from 1968, and Paint Your Wagon from 1969. Each performance had his special mix of toughness and emotion. Whether he was playing a tough soldier, a revenge-seeking hitman, or a reluctant anti-hero, Marvin brought a realness that very few actors could match. His work with directors like John Borman and Robert Aldrich showed how versatile he was. He could be brutal, thoughtful, funny, or heartbreakingly human, often all in the same role. Away from the camera, Lee Marvin was just as complicated as his characters. He was known for his direct honesty, no-nonsense attitude, and hard-living lifestyle. A heavy drinker who spoke his mind without apology, Marvin often didn't fit in with Hollywood's polished image. But people who knew him personally talked about his deep smarts, loyalty to friends, and dry sense of humor. He wasn't a man who put on an act. He valued truth more than being polite, and this realness made colleagues respect his honest nature. Even though he seemed rough on the outside, he had a thoughtful side and often showed a quiet dislike for how fake fame could be. Marvin's later years included continued success and some controversy. He kept working into the 1980s, appearing in films like The Big Red One from 1980 and Gorky Park from 1983. However, his health started getting worse because of years of smoking and drinking. Still, even as he got older, his presence on screen stayed powerful. There was something timeless about the way he carried himself, the kind of man who seemed made for movies, who had the spirit of the Old West and the tired soul of a soldier all at once. Lee Marvin's personal life was as complicated and dramatic as many of the roles he played on screen. Throughout his life, he was married twice, and each marriage showed different times in his personality and career, one during his rise to fame and the other during his years as an established Hollywood legend. His first marriage was to Betty Ebeling in 1952, a marriage that began just as Marvin was taking his first real steps into the world of professional acting. At the time, he was still a struggling performer, taking small parts in television and low-budget films. Betty, a warm and steady person, stayed with him during those difficult early years when fame and money were still far away. Together, they built a family, raising 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters. While Marvin's career slowly got better, Betty's loyalty and patience helped keep him grounded as he went from small parts to major film roles. However, Marvin's growing fame, combined with his busy work schedule, constant travel, and well-known love of nightlife and heavy drinking, put huge strain on their relationship. His rough personality, so admired on screen, was often hard to live with at home. After 15 years of marriage, the relationship hit a breaking point and the couple divorced in 1967. Even though they separated, Betty remained one of the few people who truly understood Marvin's complicated nature, and their children continued to be a major part of his life. 3 years later in 1970, Lee Marvin married Pamela Feely, a woman who had been part of his life for several years before they got married. Unlike his first marriage, which had started during his climb to fame, this second marriage happened after Marvin had already become successful as one of Hollywood's most respected tough guy actors. Pamela, often described as elegant, intelligent, and strong-willed, gave a stabilizing influence to the actor's later years. Their relationship, while deeply loving, wasn't without problems. Marvin's reputation for drinking and his sometimes explosive temper occasionally led to public arguments, but Pamela stayed steady and loyal, earning respect from those who knew them. The couple lived together in Tucson, Arizona, and later in the small beach town of Montecito, New York. Before settling in Los Angeles, Pamela's presence brought a sense of balance to Marvin's life that had been missing for years. She stood by him through both professional highs and personal challenges, including health problems that started bothering him in his later years. Their marriage was also marked by a long and very public legal battle involving Marvin's former companion, Michelle Triola, who famously sued him in the late 1970s for palimony, a case that would become one of Hollywood's most talked about legal dramas of the decade. Throughout the whole ordeal, Pamela remained supportive and by Marvin's side, handling the intense media attention with quiet strength, unlike his first marriage, which ended in divorce. Marvin's second marriage lasted until his death in 1987. In his later years, Marvin often gave Pamela credit for helping him find peace and stability after decades of chaos and fame. She was with him during his final days, and those close to the couple described their relationship as one of deep mutual respect and lasting affection. Throughout his life and career, Lee Marvin was known as a man who didn't hold back his words. His gravelly voice and rough-edged honesty were as much a part of him as the hard-drinking, battle-hardened characters he played on screen. When asked in later years about some of his fellow actors in Hollywood, Marvin never hesitated to speak the truth, no matter how it might sound to others. One of the names that often came up was Cary Grant, the perfect example of Hollywood charm and class. For decades, Grant was seen as the symbol of elegance and style, but Marvin's view of him was far more complicated and surprisingly honest. In one of his interviews, Marvin spoke openly about his thoughts on Grant, mixing admiration with his trademark bluntness. Cary Grant, Marvin began, was a hell of a guy to watch on screen, but off camera, he was one of the most private men you'd ever meet. Everything he did was calculated, not in a bad way, but in a professional way. He understood the power of image better than anyone I ever met in this town. Marvin, who took pride in being raw and unpolished, found Grant's controlled calmness both fascinating and somewhat strange. He continued, "I was a Marine, for God's sake. I didn't know how to polish an image. Cary was born for it. He could walk into a room and make everyone believe he'd been born in a tuxedo." Marvin admired Grant's discipline and intelligence, but also pointed out that beneath the smooth exterior was a man who struggled deeply with who he really was. "People thought Cary was just this charming Englishman with the perfect smile," Marvin said. "But Archie Leach, that's who he really was never far away. He fought hard to bury that part of himself. You could see it in his eyes if you looked long enough." To Marvin, Grant's transformation from humble Bristol boy to Hollywood's most debonair leading man was both impressive and sad. He respected Grant's ability to reinvent himself but pitied how much effort it took for him to keep up that illusion year after year. Marvin also revealed that while Grant was always polite, he could be distant. "He wasn't the kind of guy who'd go drinking with you after a shoot," Marvin said. "Cary didn't need that. He had his own rhythm, his own circle. I don't think he ever really let anyone in completely." Coming from a man like Marvin, who lived his life out in the open, this sense of distance was almost impossible to understand. Marvin, who had survived the horrors of war and the craziness of fame, valued being real over looking good. To him, Grant's polished perfection seemed like a prison as much as a crown. Still, Marvin had no doubts about Grant's huge talent. You could put him in front of a camera doing nothing and people would be glued to him, Marvin admitted. That's star power. You can't fake that. Guys like me, we had to growl and bleed to make people watch. Cary? He just smiled and the whole damn room lit up. Marvin's respect for that natural magnetism was clear. Even if he personally couldn't relate to Grant's restraint and refinement, he saw Grant as one of the last true movie stars. An artist who understood how to make the camera fall in love with him without ever breaking a sweat. When asked whether he and Grant ever worked together or hung out socially, Marvin chuckled. Cary Grant and me in the same picture? That would have been like mixing bourbon with champagne. It doesn't work, he joked. He represented the high life and I represented the bar fight. But I'll tell you this, if Cary Grant had been born a few decades later, he might have been tougher. There was something under that polish, a little edge that he never got to show. In the end, Marvin's thoughts on Grant were not about jealousy or dislike, but about two very different men who defined what it meant to be masculine in their own ways. Grant, smooth and composed, represented the dream of perfection. Marvin, scarred and blunt, represented the truth of imperfection. Yet both were undeniably real in their own worlds. You can't fake being Cary Grant, Marvin concluded. And you sure as hell can't fake being Lee Marvin. We both knew who we were, even if we came at it from opposite ends of the street. Lee Marvin's words captured the rare honesty of a man who saw past Hollywood's glamour and into the souls of its legends. His comments about Cary Grant revealed both respect and insight and acknowledgement that beneath the tailored suits and silver screen smiles, Grant was as human as the rest of them. In Marvin's world, that was the highest compliment he could give. In December 1986, Marvin's declining health took a serious turn when he was hospitalized for more than 2 weeks due to complications from coccidioidomycosis, a fungal infection sometimes known as valley fever. The disease is caught by breathing in spores of the fungus coccidioids, which is found in dry regions of the American Southwest, particularly California and Arizona, areas where Marvin often spent time filming or living. For most people, the infection causes only mild flu-like symptoms. But for Marvin, whose immune system was likely weakened from years of smoking and drinking, the disease turned into a serious respiratory illness. His lungs, already damaged from decades of tobacco use, struggled to work properly, and he began to have severe breathing difficulties. Doctors gave him steroids to reduce swelling and ease his breathing, a common but risky treatment for someone with his health history. Unfortunately, the steroids that temporarily helped his lungs had terrible side effects on other parts of his body. Marvin suffered major intestinal ruptures, a life-threatening problem that required emergency surgery. He underwent a colectomy, a surgical procedure to remove a portion of his colon, an ordeal that left him weakened and in constant pain. Even after the operation, Marvin's recovery was slow and complicated. The physical strength that had carried him through war, years of stunt work, and a lifetime of rough living was fading quickly. Friends and family members noticed that the once lively and commanding figure appeared frail and exhausted in his final months, his deep voice now raspy, his tall frame thinner and more hunched over. Despite his illness, Marvin faced his final chapter with the same tough attitude that had defined his entire life. He had never been one to complain or show weakness, even when facing grave danger or personal hardship. Those close to him said that he kept his dry sense of humor and fierce independence almost to the very end. But his body could no longer keep up with his strong spirit. On August 29, 1987, Lee Marvin died of a heart attack at the age of 63. His death marked the end of an era for Hollywood, a time when leading men were expected to be rugged, raw, and unpolished, much like Marvin himself. His passing was mourned by fans, colleagues, and filmmakers who admired his authenticity, professionalism, and fearless honesty both on and off the screen.